So, Peter, thanks for coming on to our podcast. Please introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Donnie, and thank you very much for inviting me to your podcast. My name is Peter. My surname is Pham. It's spelled Pham. I'm a solicitor from Pham Solicitors at Richlands. So if you don't know where Richland is, it's in the western suburb near Forest Lake in Oxley and Ginnerley area.
Yep.
We have an office about 12 people, and we do predominantly commercial and property work. So there's a lot of contracts work and transactional works and a lot of drafting. So a lot of buying and selling, all sorts of things for us. Anything related to property, we do. We got a team of 12, only do that kind of work. Yes.
Perfect. So some of the questions that I'd like to touch on today is, for a first home buyer out there, what would be the paperwork that they require to buy a property, or where do they start?
Well, I would think that at the beginning they have to be able to work out what sort of budget they would like to they would have, and from there they will look for properties that fit in with that budget. Assuming that's under control, then they would start looking for a property, and they would, if they're happy to make an offer, they normally offer through a real estate agent. Of course, if there's an agent involved, it will be unusual for them to have any direct communication with the owner.
Yep.
So normally negotiations are conducted through a real estate agent. Now, once negotiations are finalized, the agent normally present them with an offer. Now, in Queensland here, an offer would come in the form of a contract, a formal contract. So the agent would prepare a contract, present it to the buyer, and that would normally be an offer. Now, we call an offer, it's not a piece of paper, it's actually a contract. So it's a serious offer.
Which is standard by REIQ.
Correct.
Yep.
Normally an IQ contract. And therefore, if a contract is signed by the buyer, then that will be an offer present to the owner. Now, it's a serious matter because if the offer is accepted, then the owner will sign the contract, and therefore the contract will be formed.
Yep.
And therefore it cannot be taken back anymore. So it's a serious matter to sign an offer. So once the contract has been formed, signed by the owner, that will then be presented back to the buyer, and then from there you have the contract form.
Yep.
And the conveyancing process will start from there.
Yep. What about the cooling off period, Peter?
Sure. In Queensland here, any residential contract would have a cooling off period of 5 working days, right? And therefore, what does that mean? That means that the buyer can cancel the contract for whatever reason within that cooling off period.
Without any default interest?
Correct. So there's no need for giving reasons. They can just simply exercise their right to cancel the contract within the cooling off period. They've got to bear in mind that there is a small penalty.
Okay.
It's 0.25% of the contract price. That's a penalty to be paid to the seller if they wish to exercise that cooling off period. And normally that's taken off the deposit that they usually would pay when the contract is accepted by the owner.
Yep.
The rest of the deposit, if any left, will be refunded back to the buyer.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The cooling off can be waived though. Be careful because it can be waived. So it's buyers have cooling off period, but if the buyer waives that cooling off, that means that they say they don't want that cooling off.
Yep.
They sign a piece of paper, they don't want it.
Yep.
Then obviously they don't have the cooling off.
Fair enough. Is there a minimum in terms of deposits and a maximum?
Yep. So for a standard residential contract, that is buying an existing residential property.
Yes.
There is a limit as to how much the deposit must be. It cannot be more than 10% of the contract price.
Yep.
As to anything below that, well, that's the matter of negotiations. It could be 5%, 4%, 5%, or any amount, as long as it's no more than 10%. So as to what the deposit might be under 10%, that's a matter for negotiations. Yes.
Would that be different for the auction?
For auction contracts, it's normally 10%. But if you would like to reduce that to an amount lower than 10%, then you have to negotiate that before the auction starts.
Oh, okay. So there would be some sort of variation form that you need to sign.
Is that correct? You negotiate with the agent, say that, look, if I win the auction, then I would only pay 5%, for example, or 8%.
Yep.
If the agent accepts that before the auction, then when you sign the contract, you succeed the auction, then the contract will be only that amount. Yes. But otherwise, it's normally 10% for an auction contract. Yes.
And in terms of settlement date, it would be varies from contract to contract, right?
That's correct. So settlement date is again a matter of negotiations, but obviously, how long it is, most of the time will depend on whether you're ready for your finance. For example, if you finance with the bank, the bank might take time to approve the loan and to
process the paperwork.
Process the paperwork and be ready to draw out the money. So sometimes as to how long 7 days, it depends on the question of how long it takes you to get your finance in order.
Yep.
And so normally about 30 days, contract can be 40 days. Yes. But if you have the cash ready, then obviously it could be a matter of a week or 2 weeks even if you have the money ready. Yes.
So it's all about the fun.
Correct. I would say so, yes.
How does the stamp duty works, Peter, like compared to, say, a first home buyer as well as the investment or investors?
Sure. Well, transfer duty, or we call it stamp duty in the old days, is assessed on the basis of the contract price. So there's a calculation. It's a bit complicated, but there's a calculator online. You can put that in there, the contract price, and you work out how much is transfer duties. Now, if you buy a property to live in, you get some concession or some discount on transfer duty.
Okay, place of residence, yep.
Correct. So now then the question then is it your first principal place of residence, or is it not your first place of principal residence? If it's your first place of principal residence, then the question is how much you buy it for. If it's under 500, you pay no transfer duty.
Okay.
Provided you live there for 12 months.
Okay. Yep.
And not rent out or sell within the first 12 months. If it's not your first principal place of residence, that is, you own something before, you own a house before, then it's you still get a concession, but it's a bit less. So I normally work out probably about $7,000 less in the normal transfer duty.
Okay. Yep.
So for example, you buy a property, let's say $6,000, you might in a normal transfer duty rate would approximately be probably about $17,000, $18,000, $19,000. But if it's your a place to live in, and it's not your first principal place of residence, you probably end up paying about $7,000 less or so, approximately. Yes.
Well, I think, because buying, quite a few investment property myself, as soon as you get to the $1 million mark, I think the stamp duty is getting very, very high, isn't it?
That's right. Yes, it jumps
dramatically.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes,
tremendously as well.
Yes.
And in terms of just say buying a property, what do you actually do as part of the contract, like searches and building and pest inspections and all the other stuff that you need to do?
Yeah. So searches. What is searches? So searches is a form of investigation.
Okay.
We would call it that. Investigate about the property. Most of the time we investigate about whether or not, how much is outstanding in terms of rates, the water charges, the title. We investigate who owns the house, for example, who owns the property.
Yep.
To make sure that we are dealing with the right people.
Yep.
Any mortgages. So that's called searches. It's a form of investigation, finding information about the property. Now, as to what extent do we do that investigation, do that search, it depends on each case, and depends on what the client is buying the property for example. If it's just a standard residential house to live in, then just it's the basic searches would be, the rate search. That is to say that to ask the council how much is our rates outstanding.
Yep. Flood.
The flood search to see if any flood. The water search, for example, to see any outstanding water charges. The title search to see who owns the house and any mortgage on title that need to be discharged.
Yep. What if they're bankrupt? Are you able to find it or?
We can. So we can certainly find out someone bankrupt by searching the name.
Okay.
Yep. We can also find if they're bankrupt by searching their name through the court portal, the court register. So search their name will come up any cases in relation to that person.
Yep. Or if a company putting a caveat on the property as well, right?
Correct. So we do a title search. We establish if there's any caveat on title. So we establish the title to show who the owner is.
Yes.
Any mortgages, any easements, any caveat, of course. It will show on that. So the most basic search a person has to do for a property purchase is, of course, a title search.
Yeah.
It shows you who owns the house, any mortgages, any caveat, any issues affecting the title.
Yes.
Right. So that's the most basic search that a buyer has to do in a purchase conveyancing matter.
Is it big difference for residential and commercial with those searches?
Yep. So for a commercial building, we have to do some extra searches. For example, the most basic one, we have to do a search, what we call a certificate classification or a certificate occupancy. It's the same thing. It's like in residential context, it's like a final inspection certificate, right? So with a commercial building, every commercial building, most, not all, but depends on the age of the building, but most commercial building would have a certificate classification or certificate occupancy issue. What it does is that it's issued, so it's classified what the building can be used for lawfully. For example, you buy
zoning.
More or less, yes, more or less. So if you buy a commercial or buy an office building, you want to do that search to see what sort of building is classified as. Yep. If it's classified as, for example, a shopping center, a warehouse, for example, but it's being used for something else,
like retail.
That's right. And then that's a cause of concern because obviously it's not being used lawfully. For example. In addition to that, we used to do, the search is a bit more extensive. We'd certainly look at for commercial building, we look at other searches a bit more extensive, for example, building or plumbing searches. And there stormwater. That's right. And other investigations such as we have to review leases, for example, because a lot of people buy commercial buildings for income purposes, rental income purposes, which is a big motivation for most people. It's important because it affects the market value of the commercial building. So we need to look at the leases to establish the rental income, the annual increases, and that sort of thing, which is a very extensive exercise because most leases can be quite complicated and complex.
It is. So with the commercial, in terms of the cost, it's going to be very, very much in difference. Like it's going to be a lot higher, wouldn't it? In terms of the in terms of getting the property settled, it's going to be more complicated, and the cost will be a lot more. During doing the searches, and stamp duty is higher. Everything is going to be more expensive, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so the legal costs will normally be a bit higher because the work is a bit more extensive.
Okay. So
I can say, not certainly the reviewing the leases, for example, some of the leases most leases will be about 30, 40 pages at least. If you're a building of 20 shops, and, that's 20 leases to review, each lease 30, 40 pages. And the search is a bit more extensive. There's a lot more. There might be what you call service agreements, for example, for shopping centers. Service agreement like cleaners and if it's an office building, it's lift contractors, that sort of stuff. Sometimes it's quite ask us to review. There's the issue of outgoings, which is important, like rates, water, the land tax, insurance. That's important because in commercial buildings, outgoings are normally sometimes paid by tenants, for example. We need to check, make sure that whether the tenants pay those outgoings or not. Otherwise, the landlord end up paying for it. So that could affect the rental income.
Certainly.
So in some of the legal costs, it's a lot more extensive, and so the legal costs can be much higher than a residential conveyancing transaction. The searches, the search is a lot more extensive. I think it costs a bit more to do as well.
Time consuming and that sort of stuff.
The transfer duty, there is certainly no concession for transfer duty because it's commercial building.
Yes.
Of course, most commercial buildings cost a lot more than a residential property.
Certainly.
So, which own business, a lot of time would be in the 7-digit figure. So therefore, transfer duty, we can easily talk about 6-digit figure for transfer duty, isn't it?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And there's no concession, and there's a concession apply as well. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Would there be any restrictions for international investors to kind of invest into commercial building these days?
There are, but it's a bit more complicated. But for a normal commercial buildings, there would not be, unless there's a limit as to how much a foreign person can buy in terms of commercial. But we're talking a very, very big limit.
You're talking about price-wise, or you're talking about
price-wise? That's correct.
Okay.
For America, we're talking a very big limit. We're talking about probably 8-digit or so. So yeah, very big limit. And also there might be some restriction in terms of what they're buying, particularly if it's most time wouldn't apply, but there are some restriction in terms of the kind of property that they're buying. For example, if it's a property that affects, for example, national security, infrastructure,
true.
that sort of thing, then there might be some restriction there. But otherwise, it's a normal shopping center under the threat zone, a very big threat zone, then it should be fine. And there's no transfer duty for foreign person.
Okay.
So if a foreign person buy a residential property in Queensland, they'll be paying extra 7% of the contract price. For commercial, there's none of that. Yeah.
And does the Foreign Investment Board, do they actually review on a person that holds that particular investment?
When I say review,
like do they investigate and that sort of stuff, or you have to meet a certain criteria to be able to buy those investments?
It's up to the buyer to decide or to work out whether or not they need to apply for FIB's approval. Normally, FIB would not look into any particular transaction unless there's cause for them to do.
Yep.
For example, if someone make a complaint or someone bring their attention that a foreign person buy a property that they should be seeking approval and they didn't. I think there might be database check, for example.
Okay. Yep.
There might be with the state government, with the ATO.
Yeah.
So there might be database connection where they can link to something and they might find something unusual. They might they might investigate. But otherwise, it's up to the person to work out what their obligations are in terms of whether or not they need to seek approval or not. If they don't seek approval, where they require seek approval, then it comes to the attention of FIB, then yes, they can get an infringement. There's some actions that FIB can take, but yes, you asked me if does FIB just investigate? They normally don't investigate in the sense there's a cause for concern and they investigate. But again, as I said, it's up to the person, the foreign person, to know what their obligations are.
Yes.
And yes.
Would farming be different at all in terms of for them to buy?
Yes. So there is some. If it's agricultural land property, then there are some relaxation.
Yep.
But it sometimes can be quite tricky as to work out what is agricultural land, right? So we need to look at each particular property and work out whether it meets the requirement, it meets the framework of agricultural land. It's tricky. It's complicated, that one.
Yep. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that the Chinese people that actually own dairy farmer these days, I don't know what is true or not, but I've actually read something, in the last...
Well, if it's a business, well, I mean, dairy farmer can be a business, right? So they can run a business on a big block of land.
Yeah.
So owning a business is different to owning a freehold land on which a business is run. Yes. But I'm not sure I'm not sure the particular case you referred to there.
What I'm trying to say, I think you mentioned about the national threat, in terms of the it could affect the government and that sort of stuff, or any kind of dispute or conflict of interest in terms of from government to government. When they purchase, when you're talking about national assets, like I would assume that the milk industry is part of the national assets as well. Like you're talking about Commonwealth Bank, and you're talking about farming for dairy farmers and Paul's milk and A2 milk, whatever it is. Yeah, I think it's formed part of the government sector.
It could be. It could be if it's considered to be. I mean, you have to understand the purpose of all these laws relating to foreign people buying real estate in Australia. It's designed to protect the national interest.
Yes.
Right. So if there is an acquisition, a proposed acquisition that could affect national interest, there are laws that regulate how that can be approved and what criteria they take into account. That sort of thing. Yes.
To summarize the podcast today, is there any tips that you would give to for first home buyers, for investors, or any kind of international investors that might like to invest property in Australia? Like, what would be the recommendation that you give them and say, well, for first home buyer, when you look for a property to purchase, what other thing that you need to do?
Well, before you sign the contract, they should seek advice on the contract, a draft contract.
Yep.
A lot of times, real estate agent, they can rush to getting the contract signed, particularly there's multiple offers, for example. There's no time sometimes there's very little time to get the contract checked. But at our office here, we normally check the contract straight away.
Okay.
So there's time. I mean, we should seek advice from a solicitor before you sign the contract. Because some contracts can have special conditions.
Yep.
That can be quite tricky. So that's a first home buyer. In terms of foreign people buying, again, same thing. Get the contract checked and get advice whether or not FIRB approval is required.
Yes.
It's very important because there can be quite a serious fine.
Is there a website that they should go to?
Yeah, FIRB website.
Okay.
They publish a lot of information on there about what is exempt and what is not exempt. What FIRB will approve and will not approve. But certainly, foreign people should be aware that there's transfer duty, additional transfer duty. There's fees to apply FIRB, and very importantly, they cannot sign a contract unless they got approval in advance from FIRB to buy, or they can get approval after the contract is signed, but the contract got to be conditional upon, got to be subject to them getting approval. So in other words, they can sign a contract without approval first FIRB, but the contract can have a clause in there that says that they can cancel the contract if they cannot get approval. If they don't do that, then they can get infringement.
Yep, certainly. What about for people that kind of buying property at auction? What are the steps that they need to take, prior to the auction day? You get the agent normally have a draft contract, a title search prepared in advance. So you should get someone to look at that. There might be some special conditions in there. So check out the contract before. Now, a couple other things. If you're cautious, you can get the solicitor to run some searches before the auction. Building pests should be done. Yep. Is the building and pest inspection done by the buyer or by the seller for the auction property?
Sure. Well, it's up to the buyer. The buyer can do their own.
Okay.
Sometimes the seller already has done their own as well.
Yeah.
It's up to the buyer if they accept that and use that for their own purposes.
Or conduct their own search.
Correct. I mean, a lot of times the seller would have their own because the agent, otherwise the agent would have plenty of people doing inspection. You got 10 people interested, got 10 inspections.
Yeah.
So sometimes the seller has their own and they present to the buyer. It's up to the buyer whether they use that or not. But otherwise, they can use their own inspector to inspect. So building pests should be done or should be looked at before the auction. Some searches should be done. If they are cautious, should run some searches before. Because once you go to the auction, you should see the auction and that's it.
Yeah. Have you ever found there is some sort of dispute at the auction when people buying or bought at the auction day and then found out that they're not ready for some reason, like, whether it's fund issue or whether it's some sort of situation or circumstances change?
Well, I should add that auctions don't have cooling off, right? So unlike what I said before, auction do not have cooling off period. So once you succeed the auction, that's it. There's no cooling off. Now, yes, well, there are cases where people succeed the auction, sign a contract, they realize that their finances are approved.
Yeah.
They have no money for it, or they change their mind. They go home and family persuade them to change their mind. So it will be too late then. Yes. Once you sign the contract at the auction,
It's done deal.
That's correct. It's very difficult to get out the contract.
You have to be accountable for what you actually sign.
Correct. Yes. So there's a good risk that deposit could be could be lost. Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us at our podcast, Peter. Really appreciate your time and good luck with everything. Take care.
Thanks, Tony. All good. Thank you, everyone.